And now, without further ado, here is Ben Edelstein, co-founder of LogRocket.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming. I'm Ben, and then this talk was co-written by my colleague Kalen, who's also here, and he'll be around for Q&A at the end. He's a front-end engineer on our team. So I'm going to talk today, I'll give a quick introduction to what the webinar is about. Then I'm going to talk about what is LogRocket and who we are. And so my goal today is not to give an exhaustive overview of everything that's going to happen in front end. The industry moves so quickly, there's so much going on, that would be impossible to do. What I'm going to talk about are 5 of the big areas where I think this year, by looking at these areas and thinking about how to integrate them into your development workflows, how to bring them onto your team, you can make your teams more productive and more effective. And the way I like to look at the growth and maturity of any given software tool or development process is the S-curve. So a lot of what I'm going to look at today are in the middle section or this second inflection point of the S-curve, where there's recently been a lot of improvements, a lot of movement, but now it's starting to stabilize. Big companies have started to adopt. And this is the time when it's really important to look at a technology and say, now it's effective, now it's mature, and we can integrate it into our workflow. So a brief bit of background on who we are. LogRocket is a front-end application performance management tool. We record a video of every user in your web application along with technical telemetry. And we help when you get bug reports or support tickets or complaints. We help you figure out exactly what went wrong for the user and how to fix it. We have a lot of great customers. You can see some of them here. And the way it works is you add 1 line of JavaScript code using either NPM or a script tag, and then we capture what's in the DOM, letting you replay and see exactly what was on the user screen with session replay, see all the network logs, requests and responses with headers and bodies, console logs, JavaScript errors. If you use a Flux library like Redux, we record those actions and state. And again, this is for when you get reports of issues, support tickets, showing you exactly what the user saw and what went wrong. And then we also proactively surface new issues and alert you about problems that are affecting your users, so you can confidently ship your application and know that your user experience is not suffering from technical issues. So the first big trend I want to talk about, number 1, is TypeScript. And we believe that in 2019, TypeScript will see a huge explosion of adoption. So as a bit of background on what is TypeScript, maybe you've heard of it but haven't used it. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that compiles into plain JavaScript. And what it lets you do is write code, which is basically JavaScript, but has types. So here in this example, this is a function, and we say the function takes an argument person. But what's different than normal vanilla JavaScript is that we've defined what is the type of the argument of this function. And you can do the same thing for variables as well. And this is similar, like if you're familiar with a statically typed language like Java that you've used in the past, it's the same idea, but JavaScript doesn't have these types by default. And what TypeScript does is at compile time, because it understands what are the types of your variables or what arguments function, what is the type of function arguments, at compile time, it can catch bugs before you even run your application and long before they reach your users. TypeScript can catch some of these bugs. And TypeScript is actually not the only way to do this in JavaScript. TypeScript was developed by Microsoft. It dates back to 2012. But then there's also Flow, which is a project from Facebook and has a lot of similar functionality. But what we've seen over the past few years is that TypeScript has emerged as the clear winner in the space. If you look at this graph on the upper left here, which shows the amount of downloads on NPM, TypeScript is increasing at a faster rate than Flow. Looking at developer mindshare, seeing the results from the State of JavaScript survey, TypeScript far outpaces the growth of Flow, and its popularity increases year over year. And the reason why TypeScript is important is that front-end applications are getting more complex. Here at LogRocket, we know this. Our front end is a very complex application. It does a lot. I'm sure that's the same for many of you out there. Year by year, the way we build applications is changing, and more logic is moving to the front end. And by using tools like TypeScript and investing more time up front and writing these type annotations, it allows us to catch more issues at compile time before they reach our users. And along with reducing bugs, it also speeds up development processes by doing things like automatic type inference. So it can even if you don't type all your variables or functions, TypeScript could do some of that automatically. And then if you've used languages like Java with IDEs like Eclipse, you know that by doing these types in your code, it can help the IDE do smart things like helping you refactor your code or helping give previews of what functions do and give you better error messages when you're developing, all of which just make development teams more efficient. In 2019, we don't expect too many big language changes in TypeScript. It's pretty good. It's mostly there. We do expect better performance. That Microsoft has committed to continuing to improve the performance of the runtime, better features for automatic refactoring in IDEs, better error messages. And then the TypeScript team is continuing to push for feature parity with many of the new ES6 JavaScript features. And finally, and this one's really important, Microsoft has committed to an official up-to-date language spec that's publicly available. So what's great about this is it shows Microsoft's continuing commitment to develop and maintain TypeScript. And that's why we believe it's a really safe choice in terms of bringing types to your JavaScript application. So to summarize, as web applications are becoming more complex, we believe that TypeScript will be an increasingly important tool for building error-free applications. So number 2, high-performance web applications. So what do I mean by that? Well, things like games, multimedia production, graphics, doing AI and ML on the client side. We believe that in the next few years, we're going to start to see a huge increase in this type of applications coming to the browser. And that's because of technologies like WebAssembly, WebGL, and web workers that are continuing to mature at a really quick rate. And looking back at our S-curve, I think these are somewhere in the middle. They've seen a lot of rapid iteration and movement over the past couple of years, but there's starting to be buy-in from bigger companies. There's the specs and the APIs are starting to stabilize. I think 2019 is a good time if you're building software that could benefit from higher performance computing or higher performance graphics. It's a good time to start looking at how these could influence your roadmap over the next few years. WebAssembly is a brief introduction. This is a low-level compile target that runs in the browser. So in the same way where if you build a C++ app and then you compile it to run on a Mac or Windows, it's much the same. You compile the C++ to target WebAssembly and run in the browser. And then the application can access the DOM, it can access local storage, so it can do all the same things that a normal web application could do. And the cool thing about WebAssembly is that you don't need to build your entire application in Rust or Swift or C++. You can still build your application in JavaScript, but then leverage individual libraries that do the more computationally intensive tasks in a faster language like C++. We're continuing to see web workers mature and having extra features like shared array buffers for communication between web workers. And what web workers let you do is run computationally intensive tasks in another thread, so it doesn't slow down your application on the main thread. Off-screen canvas and WebGL, these are for doing high-performance graphics and computationally intensive image manipulations. And WebGL helping you build really rich graphical experiences in the browser. It's much faster than what you could do with HTML and CSS. And then finally, having ES6 become native in most of the browsers. So this means that you won't necessarily need Babel if you're not targeting old browsers like IE. And then since these features are native, the browser vendors can continue to optimize the performance of these, and this will just lead to increased performance for ES6 applications. Finally, things like TensorFlow.js. So these are tools for running machine learning models in the browser in JavaScript. And the great thing here is that, especially for like mobile applications, if you want to leverage device sensors or cameras or gyroscopes as part of data as input to machine learning models, this will all be possible. So to summarize here, in the next few years, we're going to see an explosion of computationally intensive client-side applications that were previously only possible on native platforms. Number 3, GraphQL. So GraphQL, as a bit of background, this is not a brand new technology. It's been out for a few years. And an easy way to think about it is that it's the next generation of SOAP and then REST and then GraphQL. It is a way of getting data from the back end to the front end. But it's a little more full-featured than something like REST, because GraphQL, it lets you define a schema. And this is an example here on the left. It lets you define a schema of the type of data that the back end can give to the front end. And then it helps you architect your application for querying that data and then for serving it to the front end. And GraphQL has a type system. I'm going to talk about that more later, but that's really important because it will help bring many of the same advantages of something like Typescript to the API layer of your application. Over the past 2 years, so this graph, you can see like starting in 2017 and 2018, we're in the beginning of what we think will be a hockey stick growth for GraphQL. It's seeing massive adoption. A lot of big companies are jumping in and using GraphQL. And the reason why it matters is GraphQL starts to change the way people think about the back-end versus front-end roles on a team. It gives front-end engineers more autonomy because the job of the back-end team is to build the schema and build the infrastructure that serves data for that schema. And then the front-end engineers can prototype and develop new UI features much more quickly because they don't need a new individual API for any new feature. The data is all accessible, and GraphQL helps the front-end team build components that ask for the data, which is already being served by the backend. And then the schema in GraphQL helps catch more bugs during development in the same way we talked about TypeScript catching bugs during development. GraphQL schema helps do that. And TypeScript and GraphQL can even talk to each other and help give your tooling layer a better understanding of what your application does to catch more issues. So in summary, we believe that this year we're going to see continued increase in adoption of GraphQL, and that will help teams increase the speed of experimentation and application development. So the next area I want to talk about is React. And I couldn't give a talk on trends in front end without talking about React. And as I started looking at the data of React growth over the past year, and I thought back to conversations I've had with front-end teams across the industry, the conclusion that I have come to is that in 2019, React is the only responsible choice for building a new application that has a long time horizon. So looking at what else is out there, there's Angular and Ember and Backbone and the old guard of JavaScript frameworks. And then there's new upstarts like Vue.js and Elm, which have really interesting ideas and a lot of happy users, but they don't yet have the widespread adoption or commercial backing of React. And looking at the trends over the past few years, it's clear that React has just dwarfed the competition, and the rate at which it's growing is much faster than anything else. And popularity really does matter, because if you're going to build an application that has a life cycle of 5 or longer years, ensuring that the open source community and commercial backing continues to provide support and continued feature development for a framework is crucial. And then also the ecosystem of third-party libraries and plugins, which will power much of the application functionality. It's critical that these are also being maintained and continue to be improved over the next many number of years. And finally, it's easier to hire people who know React or who want to work on React. And it's pretty easy to learn a new JavaScript framework if you know a different one, but there's still just a lot more people in the world thinking about React and enjoying React. And so it's just easier to bring people on board if you're building with React. And looking at the State of JS survey results, again, just year over year, big increases in React popularity, very happy users. In 2019, we don't expect React to change a ton. The Facebook team is continuing to work on improved performance, things like async rendering and improving the React profile, which helps you measure the performance of a React app locally. And then hooks, which are new ways of using React features without using class components. This has been really popular lately, and this will just improve the React developer experience. So to summarize, in 2019, we believe that if you're building a new application, React is the only responsible choice. So the final area I want to talk about is front-end developer tooling. Over the past few years, there's been a huge explosion of work on open source and commercial tooling to improve front-end developer tooling. Looking at what's coming from open source and browsers, there's features in Chrome and Firefox like Lighthouse in Chrome, PageSpeed Insights. So Lighthouse kind of gives your application a report card on its accessibility and its performance. PageSpeed Insights also helps measure the application performance in a local environment. Chrome has their code coverage feature, which came out to help you find unused code in your application to reduce your bundle sizes. Live expressions in the console and top-level async await. These are helpful for prototyping, iterating, and testing out code in the console. And then the WebKit team, Safari, the engine that powers Safari, is increasing their investment in web standards. So we've seen them move really quickly this past year, being one of the leaders in championing new web standards and bringing support, making Safari a better browser. And then Microsoft switching Edge, or announcing that they're going to switch Edge to Chromium, which is huge because it's one less platform for developers to worry about. So we see a future where developers will spend a lot less time worrying about cross-browser compatibility and have more time to just focus on application functionality and performance. In the commercial side of things, there's been a ton of companies start up in the past few years to help with front-end productivity. So tools like Percy and Mabel and Testeam, Chromatic for testing your application. And these tools help with building robust regression tests, helping you visualize changes to your application due to code issues, testing at the component level, and other things like Storybook, which I didn't put on here, but that's for testing or for visualizing components and locally in different states. And then monitoring, once your application reaches production, tools like Apollo for monitoring your GraphQL APIs, and of course LogRocket for monitoring your front-end user experience and technical issues. So to summarize this section and summarize the whole talk, we believe that in 2019, there will be significant opportunities to improve developer productivity on the front end through leveraging new open source and commercial tools like Typescript and GraphQL and React, and then the wealth of commercial tooling out there to help further increase productivity. So now I'd love to open it up to question and answer. Jeff, do you want to look and see if we have any questions that have come in from the audience?
Definitely. Let me grab those up. Okay, so it looks like we have a few questions that have come in. Everyone feel free to get your questions in now if you haven't yet. We're going to go through what we've got. If we run out, we're going to call it. Yeah, so feel free to get your questions in now while we're answering the ones we already have. First up, if I'm using a legacy web framework, how can I adopt some of these new ideas without rewriting my entire app?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And looking back at what we talked about in the presentation, starting with TypeScript, actually. So the cool thing about TypeScript is that it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. It has a great gradual adoption story. So you can actually set up TypeScript and not change a single line of code. And through type inference, it can intelligently know what the types of certain variables are and certain functions, and then start giving you insights and start catching issues at compile time before you change a single line of code. GraphQL, there's also a good story there because you don't need to rewrite your entire API. You could just write a new API in GraphQL. React, it's a little more difficult if you're using something like Angular, but there are ways to build a new section. If you have a bit of greenfield application coming in, you could use React for that as well. And then on the commercial side, looking at these tools I talked about, virtually all of these tools are framework and language agnostic. So with the exception of Apollo, which is just for GraphQL, but these testing tools and LogRocket, these can all be used with basically any web application.
All right. Our next question, what about state management?
Yeah, this is a very common question in a lot of front-end teams because there's basically only Redux as the most popular solution and then a host of other solutions that have come up over the last year. But still, by and large, in the last year, you've seen Redux increase its popularity. You've seen larger companies switch to it. But there are still many other solutions. Like RxJS is kind of basically a complementary solution to Redux. But you've actually seen other frameworks, like Angular, for instance, adopting many of the ideas of Redux because they've enjoyed the debugging capabilities, like the NGRX library inspired by Redux and RxJS. And even GraphQL is implementing some things from Redux. So overall, I think we'll continue to see Redux maintain its dominance, but you will also see, I think, more reactive solutions like RxJS. I think we have another question.
Yeah, hold on one sec. Let's pull up the next question from the audience here.
So we have a question, thoughts on Electron. And if you're not familiar, Electron is basically a way to run web applications in an OS agnostic environment for desktop applications, that is not mobile applications. Electron powers many very popular commercial applications like Slack. If you use Slack, you're using an Electron app. There are dozens, probably thousands actually, of Electron apps in commercial use now. So it's very popular. And recent changes and things to look out for is the Electron team is continuing to focus on performance because that's one of the main complaints about Electron is that it uses a lot of memory. You have Chrome, the Chrome development team is also working on an environment, like a version of Chrome, basically, a version of Electron that uses the locally installed version of Chrome. So that solves the huge file size problem that Electron apps have.
Cool. So next question, is TypeScript a JavaScript library that needs to be installed?
Well, TypeScript is implemented in JavaScript, but it is not a library per se. It is a tool. It's a node tool that does need to be installed through NPM. But no, it is not a library. You do not import TypeScript and then use it in your code.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So TypeScript is a build tool. It transpiles TypeScript code to vanilla JavaScript code that runs in the browser. So it doesn't increase the size of your application or affect application performance. It's just something that's used at build time.
Yes.
let's see here. So we have a question here. Any worry that since React came from Facebook that it will be controlled by that entity rather than by the community? That's a question that's popped up. I've seen it pop up a lot online, basically since the beginning of React. It's not a huge concern, I think, because Facebook's motives are, which they've made clear, and I believe, are simply that they do a vast amount of front-end application development inside Facebook, and they want the best possible tool to do that application development. And they are kind of leading the forefront of some of the rich complexity that can come to front end, and React is just a tool to solve that problem for them. The original license it came out under was a bit concerning, but I believe last year they changed the license to a fully open license. So theoretically, even if Facebook took React in a direction that was very detrimental to the rest of the community, it could be forked, and then a new fork of React could be developed led by just the community. So I think it's a very safe choice that's not a big concern we have for the future of React. Okay, so we have another question from the audience here. What about mobile development?
Yeah, that's another area that you've seen some recent changes. So for a while, we've just been talking about React, and there's the companion to React, React Native. That's been out for, I believe, at least 5 years. But if you look at the surveys, State of JS, and for instance, the Stack Overflow Developer Survey, you see that it's actually starting to decline in popularity, despite the improvements that it makes to other solutions like native apps. You see, I have seen recently in the last year, like newer hybrid mobile app frameworks, like NativeScript and a new great version of Ionic, if you use that framework, that really improve the experience of making hybrid mobile apps. That is, mobile apps that use JavaScript but have a thin wrapper for mobile. And now, of course, with Google, you see a push for progressive web apps, which are fully web applications. They're not hybrid apps, they're fully web. So I really think that's the trend, since the reasons for using like the hybrid approach is that you get like the native APIs that you wouldn't otherwise get. But now with web standards and browser APIs as they are, all that is now available in web applications. So there's really less and less reasons to not have a fully native web app, or fully web app.
Great, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We have hit the bottom of the hour, and so we're going to cut it here. Everyone, thank you so much for taking your time to join us today. We had a great time. We enjoyed being able to speak with you and look forward to speaking again soon. Thanks, everyone, so much. Bye.